Hey there, it's Amy from Buttercake. In this tutorial, I'm going to show you how I did this lovely lighthouse cake. It's very tall. There's a lot of details, some ombre blue buttercream, fun piping, and a really beautiful watercolor painted fondant lighthouse that I attached to the side of the cake and added details around. Can't wait to show you how I did it. Let's get started. First things first is I am using this photo that I found online as my kind of inspiration for this whole cake. I really loved it. I am laying out the outline for the lighthouse. I'm using cardstock here and a small ruler and just a pencil. Building my frame. So basically I decided that I wanted it to be about 6 inches tall in height. So I drew a line on the bottom and then measured up 6 inches on either end and then drew a line across that way. And then I just picked a point close to the center. Might not be exactly center, but that's okay. And created a line, a perpendicular line that way. Then I measured the actual lighthouse in the photo just to kind of get my scale. It was 1 inch wide and about 3 inches tall. So because I wanted the actual lighthouse on the cake to be 6 inches tall, I made it 2 inches wide at the base. So using that center line, I just measured out 1 inch from either side and made a little mark. And then I picked another spot a little bit higher up from that and marked the same width, 1 inch out from that center line. And then I marked just a little bit further up from that, or close to those second marks, drew a line across, and then right below that, drew a line just slightly shorter. This is to build the platform. And the edges of that platform, it's slightly tapered as it goes up, you'll see. So it's not perfectly straight up and down on the sides, just as a lighthouse would be. Drawing those outside lines here. Now I realize I did a lot of measuring and marking, and really I just did all of this to make it as symmetrical as possible so that this template gave me just a really nice fondant piece. I didn't want to have something that was, shorter on one side or too slanted on the other. So here I'm just creating the upper platform of the lighthouse. I used my center line and marked out just a little bit shorter, maybe like 3/4 of an inch instead of 1 inch. And then I'm marking at the top here 1 inch out from the center line to create the roof. It's a triangular roof. You can see here that I decided that I actually made it too far out because the windows are going to be too sloped. So I tried to erase it a little bit just so that I can make it a little bit shorter so that it looks a little bit nicer. And then drawing sloped lines to connect, and that's going to be the window portion of the lighthouse. And then finally just doing that sloped roof on top. I did also decide to add a little triangle on top. There was one in the reference photo, and I thought, why not? Why not add it? Adding some extra railing here. I did add this part, and then I thought later that it probably didn't need to be on there, but it's fine. It worked out in the end. You'll see when I paint it that I painted it a blue to match the background of the cake. So there we go. And then, I just freehanded that little triangle on top. So this looks pretty good to me. And that's what I went with. And I decided to cut it out from here. Now, if you don't have cardstock, you can just use regular printer paper or even construction paper. I just like using cardstock. It's a little bit easier to work with because it's a thicker kind of paper, and it makes it easier to use as a template. Carefully cutting it out here, just showing you a little bit sped up. These little points and corners are kind of difficult to get into, so I kind of just cut away larger pieces of the cardstock to make it easier, so I wasn't fighting with so much of it to get in there and get nicer cuts. I will say though that all these tiny little parts that I added, little details like that top triangle, did make it a little bit trickier to cut out my fondant. So that's something to consider as well. You know, you might decide if you want to do something like this to just make it more streamlined, less details, way simpler. Although this is pretty simple regardless. There we go. Perfect. So I use a little cornstarch here on a silpat mat to roll out my fondant. And this is just Renshaw fondant. I like using it because it dries really well. And once you put it on the cake, if you have to store your cake in the refrigerator for any amount of time, it doesn't melt. So that's a total bonus if you're making this a day ahead or whatnot. So I just laid that on there, and then I'm using just a little utility knife, X-Acto knife, to cut out. I'm doing more of a pressing down motion. If you drag it, it pulls the fondant, and then you kind of lose your shape. So it's a lot better to just press down on the fondant and make your cuts, and then you can go back along the edges and just kind of do like longer strokes just to clean it up a little bit. But this initial cutting works best if you just apply top-down pressure. Getting in all the edges as best I can. And again, it's easier to clear away excess fondant as you're working rather than trying to keep it all attached and moving things around. There you can see I'm kind of just dragging it along the edge just to get little pieces off, but it does pull the fondant. So then down at the bottom I have to clean it up as well. Something to keep in mind. There we go. Just taking my time. This is really sped up, but it actually took me a little while to cut this out. And once you do have it cut out, it's best to let your fondant dry. A couple days is really nice. You know, you might not have that much time, but at least 24 hours, because the watercolor painting on it is going to soften it up a little bit more. So you want to make sure that it's fully dry before working with it. Just peeled off that template, and then I smoothed it out a little bit, and I'm just going back around the edges to clean anything up that I can visually see. Those little points there, and there we go. Looks pretty good. Happy with that. I let mine dry for a couple days. Now this part was a ton of fun. It took a while to do this. This was definitely one of those things that I did after my daughter went to bed, and I just stayed up late and sat at my kitchen table with my little palette and my brush and my fondant cut out. I used some blue gel color and black gel color, and then I had a little well of almond extract because it's clear. You could also use clear vanilla extract or butter extract. Those are all clear ones, and they'll all give a nice flavor as well. I prefer almond because I just like the flavor so much. There you can see I'm adding some diluted black to that edge, and that's going to help build up the shading. So giving the whole lighthouse an overall effect of the sun hitting it from that left side. So this is going to be the dark side of the lighthouse. And it looks really dark and harsh here. That's okay. I come back in with a wider brush and some more almond extract to dilute it and drag that color out a little bit, just to fade it and make it more soft. You can see there that it's becoming softer. And that's the really nice thing about watercolor, is because it's very forgiving, or the watercolor technique. I mean, technically I'm not using water, but it's very forgiving. You can come back in with your whatever you're using to dilute the gel colors and just add more of that, and it'll clean up any harsh lines or anything like that. So here I'm creating a shadow for my platform. And these are the outer edges that I mentioned earlier. I ended up making these blue to kind of match the blue that I was going to use on the cake, because the actual photo itself, this is the color of the sky, because this would be the railing. This is an actual lighthouse structure. The railing would be on the edge of that. Here I'm using a wide brush and just doing straight up and down strokes to create sort of a paneled window look. And then going in with some darker to kind of outline all of the areas up here along the roof and in here at the edges of the windows. Again, if your lines aren't perfectly straight or anything like that, you can just go back over them with more diluted color and clean them up a bit. It's a lot of fun painting like this. I really enjoy it. You can see there I made like a squiggly line, but no worries. It is all part of the process. You could even use this technique directly on buttercream. You would just want to make sure that your buttercream is very well chilled. The reason I like doing it on fondant is because then you're working on something on a flat surface. It's a lot easier to paint that way. I find I can have a much steadier hand if I'm working on something on a flat surface, as opposed to, trying to paint on the side of a cake. Becomes a little bit more difficult. Adding some railing there with that dark black. Trying to get those as straight up and down as possible. And then also a thicker line on the right side there, just to create, again, more shadow, more depth. I also did make sure that I was pulling the color down over the edges of the fondant so that the white cut edges weren't left exposed. It looks a little more unfinished if you leave them white. So whatever color you're using in that area, you can just drag it down over the edge. Adding little pockets here underneath this platform. Keeping them as square as I can. And then making them a little bit darker on that right side. And adding more background shading. You can see I went with the darker black there. Again, this is a lot of fun. I did really enjoy sitting and doing this. I think all in all, this painting process maybe took about 45 minutes. So it really wasn't that bad, but definitely not not something that's quick to breeze through. Now, the brick pattern on this reference photo was very subtle, so I'm just adding in lines, mostly keeping them off that left edge, just because the photo with the sun hitting it on white brick, it kind of blurs out all of the details, so I try to keep with that idea a little bit. Just adding these horizontal lines, and then I'll go back in and add little tiny vertical ones later, and just kind of, again, blend until I'm happy with it. I do want to take a moment though to just thank everybody that has subscribed to my channel lately and has left comments. I really love getting all of the comments and the feedback, and compliments are lovely, and just people coming to say that they tried a recipe or they're excited to try a technique. That really makes me happy, you guys. That's why I'm sharing this. I've actually been decorating cakes for about 20 years now, professionally, and putting these videos on YouTube has really been cathartic for me. I enjoy it. I enjoy being creative, and I enjoy sharing all these techniques that have taken me years to learn and get comfortable with. So I hope you enjoy it, and I'm glad for the people that have commented that they do. So thanks for watching. Thanks for subscribing. Thanks for hanging out. I do do really appreciate that you're here. There you can see I'm just adding in some more fine details with a small brush. And that looks pretty good. Oh, we're jumping forward to the cake now. Here I have a denim blue buttercream. If you want to use the buttercream recipe that I use, I do a Swiss meringue buttercream. I will supply a link down in the description for that. I used a full 2-pound batch to decorate this cake. This is actually a 6-layer cake. Yes, 6 layers. Very, very tall. I would consider this a double barrel cake. So it's about 9 inches tall, fully decorated. A double barrel is anything between 8 to 10 inches. So I'm using this denim blue, and I just got it on the top there, and then I'm bringing it down the sides. I'm only going to bring it about halfway down the sides. This is our sky color, so I don't want to take it all the way to the bottom. I'm just getting it on there as thick as possible, and then going in with my spackling blade to scrape it off. Now, I'm not going for super smooth because this is a sort of natural background. Anytime I do like sky or grass or trees or anything like that, I try not to get it completely smooth because it just gives it the rough surface, more of a natural look. So I got that on there, and then I took the top edges off. Again, just taking the edges off and not trying to get it really smooth. Now here I have a brighter blue. I just use my royal blue gel color to achieve this color or shade of blue. And I'm going in and getting that bottom half coated. And then I go back in with another bright shade of blue that I added a couple drops of black to, just to take the brightness out of it a little bit. And this is just going to give us more texture to the sort of ocean part of this cake. And it's all about texture and variation. Again, going in and not going for completely smooth, just removing it to basically make it a little more flush with the top blue color, but not worrying about perfectly smooth sides. There we go. And then I'm just taking some of that excess off the bottom edge with my straight edge spackling knife there, cleaning it up a little bit, and that is good to go. I did chill this in the refrigerator. I would give it at least an hour in the refrigerator before you add any more details to it. Now this is a small offset spatula and just some plain buttercream. Going in and just adding basically the foam on waves. I thought this was the best way to kind of get that look. I'm just adding the details at random points and gently touching it to the side of the cake so that the white buttercream attaches, and pulling it out to either side just very gently. I don't want to leave spatula marks in it. I want it to look more organic. So again, just a very, very, very gentle pressure to get this look. I did eventually go back up to the top edge of that bright blue and just add kind of like a foam the whole way around. You'll see that here in a little bit. And it gave it a really nice look and also just helped delineate the top from the bottom a little bit better. Here we go, adding in some more detail there. And I did kind of add, like one layer and then maybe a second layer on top of it just to make it as wavy as I possibly could. Here you can see me tapping, just light tapping along that top edge to add some of that sea foam. In some sections, I even used the buttercream underneath, like the unfinished, unsmooth edges, sort of, to kind of create extra depth. So I put the white on top of those unfinished edges, and it just gave it even more dimension. Speeding it up a little bit here so you can kind of get an idea how I did the rest of this section. It's all the same technique, but it's nice to see it all play out regardless. If you guys hear extra background noise at all in this video, I do apologize. It is quite windy at my house here today. I live out in the country, so we don't have a whole lot of protection. So if you hear any whooshing or howling in the background, it's just a windy winter storm we have coming in. Just a very early spring snow storm. There we go. Lovely. That section's all done. Now for the top part, I decided to do a lattice technique. And I'm marking here just down from the top edge about 1.5 inches. I'm not worrying about these marks being perfectly spaced apart. You'll see why in a second. Here we go. I'm using a cookie cutter, and I'm just using those marks as a height guide, not a width guide. The cookie cutter is going to do the width part on its own. So I'm just lining it up with the height of those dots and rolling it gently over to give me my scalloped layout. And I did that the whole way around the top until it comes to the last one there and meets up. You can see, looks great. This is a number 2 Wilton tip I have on a bag of white buttercream, and I'm doing these vertical lines. Really taking my time, attaching to the top edge, and then you can see as I pull it down and I'm applying pressure that I am making very small adjustments. If I have too much air in my bag and it pulls the buttercream to the right, I adjust very minutely to the left. Just trying to get those lines as straight as possible, and you do want to keep a slight tension on them, not enough to break them, but enough to keep it from getting too wiggly on you. And I'm just eyeballing the width of these. I did not mark anything along the top edge to make sure that these are perfectly spaced. Here you can see if you do have a break, that's fine. They just peel right off. And then if it falls again like it did on me, it's fine. You can just pull those right off the cake. And because my buttercream underneath is very well chilled, it is very easy to touch anything up. Don't worry, only my family ate this cake, so me touching the cake is not a big deal. You could also alternatively use a spatula if you're making something like this for other people or for a cake order. So there I did that the whole way around until I get to my last line here, and that's why I needed those scallops to kind of give me an idea to where I need to stop my lines the whole way around the cake. There we go, looks pretty good. And now I'm very vaguely lining up on the top. Those lines, starting in the center, there is going to be a border up here later, so they don't have to line up perfectly. I just kind of wanted to use it as a general guide to mark the foundation for my lattice on top of the cake. So I marked all one way and then turned my cake and marked in the opposite direction. Again, just using my long flat edge scraper here to mark. You could also use a ruler if that's what you have. Just want to do this so that my lines are straight. And then I'll be using the exact same tip and bag to pipe lines across the top. These are a little bit easier. You're not working on such a unusual surface. A flat surface is always easier to decorate on, I find. But I'm still taking my time. This is real time, not sped up at all. It is a bit of a tedious process, I will not lie to you. But as I always say, these are the things that I enjoy. This is the part that I like the most, is all of these details that seem to take forever. Maybe I'm a glutton for punishment. Anyways, I piped all my lines in one direction on the top and then went back in the other direction, keeping them as straight as I possibly can. I did take them all the way to the edge, just so we have as clean of a lattice as possible. There will be a border along the edge, like I mentioned, but for the sake of a clean look, I find it easier to just go all the way to the edge. And there we are. I think that looks pretty good. Now here is the completely dried lighthouse. The watercolor painting is completely dry, so it's easy to handle. I'm just adding a thin layer of buttercream on the back of it, very gently, without breaking my fondant applique here. And then I picked the spot that I wanted to be the front. I ended up deciding to go right in the middle where two scallops are going to join. And because I painted that little door at the bottom and I knew that I was going to have a big border at the bottom, I didn't want it to get covered up. So I put it a little bit higher on the cake. I didn't line it up with the board at all. I gave it like an inch of clearance. And then just gently pressing on it to attach the cake. And there we are. That is well attached. You do not have to worry, it will stay. Now here is that bright blue, and I am using a tip 104 to start the scallops. And I just kind of tucked it in behind the lighthouse a little bit to get it started. And this is the first layer. You can see I'm just ending right where those points meet. And then moving on to the next and just using the line from the cookie cutter as my guide line to lay the foundation for all of these. This part was a little bit tricky. I had to turn my bag the opposite direction and tuck it in there and pull it up, but I just took my time, as you can see, to make it as smooth as possible. The thinner end is pointing down so that it gives a little more of a delicate look. Now on the top here, I'm just doing a little overlap, and you can see I let it break there and then turn and restart just so that I can comfortably turn my cake and continue decorating. It's a little bit difficult to do this technique all at once while turning the board without giving yourself a break in the icing. And there we go. I'm just lining it up as best I can over top of that first layer, working the entire way around the cake. And then back to where the lighthouse is, I did the same thing. I flipped my bag and I tucked it in behind the lighthouse and piped from right to left. It is a little tricky because I'm right-handed, but it ended up working out. Here I'm adding that last overlap. It wasn't as clean looking as I liked, so I did come back in with a spatula, just smoothed it out a little bit with a very, very light touch, avoiding pulling that off. Now here's a large 1M tip. And I'm doing a large reverse shell border along the bottom. You can see this is a 7-inch cake, by the way. I don't think I mentioned that earlier. And it is on an 8-inch board on a 10-inch drum. I like putting the cake on the board and then on the drum because it's just easier to remove it to cut. I didn't cut the cake board down to a 7-inch size because it's going to get covered up with this border. So there you can see just a really nice chunky border on the bottom. And then I went back in with one of my blues and decided to just add a second border. But this is a very organic border, kind of go with the flow, no rhyme or reason. I did just make it the length of the previous shells, but as you can see, they change directions. They kind of wrap around different sections of the previous border. I just thought it looked interesting and fun, considering this cake is all about the ocean. And the ocean is unpredictable, so it made sense to me. There we go, adding it the whole way around and really just playing with it, kind of looking at it and seeing what I thought looked nice. Then adding a border to the top edge here. And I did a double reverse shell. So it's 2 shells in the same direction and then flipped the opposite direction, 2 shells, flip, 2 shells. You'll see what I mean. So 2 in the same direction and then flipping the shell the opposite way and then do 2 of those. And I did that continuously around the top of the cake. Had an air bubble there. Air bubbles, I find, if you don't if you stop your motion with an air bubble, you can kind of save it. And air bubbles, you can sort of feel them coming, so you can relax pressure and hopefully not have too much of a blowout when you get air bubbles in your bag. There we go. And then this last shell, I just kind of wrap it up there to give it a finished look. And there it is, all finished. Such a fun one to do. I hope you all enjoyed it as much as I did. Thank you for watching, and do take care. Bye-bye.